There are moments in life when the smallest assumptions lead to the loudest downfalls, and tonight, in the cold fluorescence of an airport terminal, a lesson was about to unfold, one so brutal, so unexpected, it would leave more than a few jaws on the floor. Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack, walking calmly across the polished floors, the heavy hum of rolling suitcases filling the air around him. To any outsider, he was just another teenager, maybe heading to visit relatives, maybe returning from a school trip, but to some eyes in this terminal, he looked like he didn't belong, and that was all it took. The check-in counter glowed softly under the overhead lights. Behind it, a blonde woman in a crisp blue uniform tapped away at her computer, her eyes flickering up just as Marcus approached. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Not curiosity, not professionalism, something colder. Marcus, unfazed, offered his ticket with a small, polite nod. He had been taught to stay composed, no matter what. The woman barely glanced at the ticket before her lips tightened into a thin line. "Sir," she said, the word already carrying a sharp edge. "The economy line is down that way." Marcus didn't flinch. He simply said, in a voice steady as steel, "I'm in first class." For a second, a beat passed, a heartbeat in which you could almost hear the grinding of assumptions in her mind. And then came the fake smile, the syrupy politeness that somehow made everything worse. "Of course," she said, plucking the ticket from his hand as if it might burn her fingers. But when she scanned it, her brows furrowed, scanned again. Her lips twitched. From a nearby corner, another staff member, a tall man with a badge pinned to his chest, wandered over, drawn by the tension like a moth to a flame. Marcus stood there, still and quiet, as the two of them murmured over the ticket, as if it was impossible that a black teenager in jeans and sneakers could afford the kind of luxury seat reserved for people wearing suits and Rolex watches. "You sure this is yours?" the man asked, half joking, half accusing. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched them. The smiles on their faces weren't kind. They were the smirks of people who thought they had caught someone slipping. The smirks of people who thought they already knew the whole story. Little did they know, the real story hadn't even started yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just shatter their assumptions, it would bury them. The hum of the airport seemed to grow louder as the two staff members exchanged glances over Marcus's ticket. Their voices dropped to a murmur, but their body language spoke volumes, shoulders stiffening, heads tilting skeptically, barely veiled looks of disbelief. Marcus stayed silent. In his pocket, his phone vibrated, a notification from his airline app confirming his seat. But he didn't pull it out. He didn't need to. He had seen this act before. Different place, different faces, same script. A slow line began to form behind him, restless passengers shifting their weight, some glancing over curiously, others impatiently checking their watches. Marcus caught a few of their looks, some sympathetic, most judgmental. He wasn't causing a scene, he wasn't raising his voice, but somehow, just by standing there, he had become the problem. Finally, the woman tapped something aggressively into her computer and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Can you step aside, please?" she said loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. "We need to verify your booking." Marcus didn't argue. He moved to the side, setting down his backpack with care, his fingers brushing over the worn fabric as if grounding himself. The tall male employee picked up a phone behind the desk, muttering into it. Marcus caught only fragments. Security check. Priority boarding. Possibly fraudulent. The words hit him like invisible stones. Nothing physical, but each syllable heavy with suspicion. Nearby, an older white couple whispered behind their hands. A teenage boy openly stared. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter as she walked by. Marcus's jaw tightened, not in anger but in quiet restraint. It wasn't the first time. And sadly, he knew it probably wouldn't be the last. But this time would end differently. Because the name on that ticket, the name printed in bold letters right above first class, was not just any name. It was a name that, if they had been paying attention, should have stopped them cold. A name that opened doors, a name that carried weight far beyond this terminal. Marcus crossed his arms loosely over his chest, his mind replaying a conversation from just a few nights ago. "Don't ever let them see you sweat," his grandfather had said, smiling behind a glass of lemonade on their front porch. "Because one day, boy, your name will walk into the room before you do." Now, standing there in the sterile, buzzing terminal, Marcus realized tonight was that night, but they had no idea what they were about to unleash, and the clock was ticking. A security guard ambled over from the side, his dark uniform crisp and his eyes already sizing Marcus up before a single word was exchanged. The male clerk at the counter pointed at Marcus with an almost imperceptible nod, muttering something Marcus couldn't quite catch. The guard's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his tone clipped and automatic, as if Marcus had already done something wrong. Marcus calmly reached into his wallet and pulled out his driver's license and boarding pass. He handed them over without a word. The security guard studied the documents, frowning deeper with each passing second. It wasn't enough. It never was. "Is this really your ticket?" the guard asked, suspicion dripping from every syllable. Before Marcus could respond, the woman behind the counter chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet for the crowd watching. "We just have to verify, sir. It's policy." Marcus bit back the 1,000 words he wanted to say. Policy. Funny how that word only seemed to apply to people who looked like him. Meanwhile, the line of passengers behind him shifted and whispered, creating a low hum of judgment and discomfort. A young white man in a business suit shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Figures, figures." Marcus heard it. He heard it all. The assumptions. The rehearsed insults cloaked in bureaucracy. The unspoken suggestion that he didn't belong here, couldn't belong here. And yet, he stood tall, because he wasn't just standing there for himself. He was standing for every time someone had been told without words that they were lesser, invisible, unwanted. Across the terminal, a sleek figure in a dark suit approached. A woman carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a sharp airline badge clipped to her jacket. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile, each step a warning bell. The staff member noticed her too, suddenly stiffening, their faces draining of color. Marcus caught the shift immediately. This wasn't just any supervisor. This was someone higher, someone with real authority. The woman stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning the situation like a chess master analyzing a board mid-play. "Is there a problem here?" she asked coolly, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The staff stammered, fumbling for words. The guard shifted awkwardly. And Marcus, finally, allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The pieces were moving now. The clock was ticking louder, because in about 60 seconds, everyone in this terminal would know exactly whose name was on that boarding pass. The woman's eyes, a piercing steel gray, flickered over Marcus, the guard, and the two clerks in a matter of seconds. She didn't need an explanation. She already knew. Marcus watched as the woman took a slow breath, schooling her expression into something cool, almost detached. Then she turned to the male clerk. "I need your manager." "Now," she said, her voice so calm it almost sounded bored. But underneath, there was fire. The clerk stammered, fumbling with the phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed. The security guard silently handed back Marcus's ID and boarding pass, mumbling something unintelligible. Marcus took his documents without a word. He didn't need their apologies. He wanted something else, something more permanent. The passengers who had been whispering before now shifted uncomfortably. A few pulled out their phones. The atmosphere was electric, charged with an unspoken question hanging thick in the air. Had they just witnessed something wrong and stayed silent? One woman in the back of the line shook her head, murmuring, "This is so messed up." Do you think people would have reacted differently if Marcus hadn't stood his ground? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you believe, because moments like this, they don't just expose individuals, they expose everyone. The tension spiked again when a new figure appeared from a side door. An older man in a sharp black suit with the airline's gold insignia pinned to his lapel. The manager. He took one look at the scene, at Marcus standing tall and unflinching, and at the terrified expressions of his employees, and something in his face shifted. Recognition. Shock. Because he had seen that last name before. In fact, he had signed off on a letter about it. Marcus Porter. And now, the facade that the staff had built so confidently was crumbling, brick by brick, in front of everyone's eyes. The manager's polished shoes clicked sharply against the tile floor as he approached. Each step felt heavier than the last. He paused for a split second before reaching Marcus, adjusting his tie as if bracing for impact. "Mr. Porter," he said, voice low, almost reverent. The clerks froze. The security guard took a subtle step back. The woman who had stepped forward earlier raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that the tides had turned. Marcus didn't say anything. He simply stared at the man, calm and patient, like someone who knew he didn't have to raise his voice to be heard. The manager swallowed visibly before continuing. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said, glancing nervously at the others. "A misunderstanding." The word hung in the air like a bad smell, too weak, too convenient. It wasn't just a misunderstanding when a black teenager flying first class was pulled aside, interrogated, and humiliated without cause. It was something uglier. Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting. The manager cleared his throat. "I'd like to personally apologize," he said, his face flushing red, "and offer you complimentary access to our VIP lounge before your flight." There it was. The corporate band-aid, the quick-fix apology for something much deeper than a spilled drink or a delayed plane. The woman who had confronted the clerks earlier folded her arms, unimpressed. She wasn't the only one. Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd of passengers. Some shook their heads, others exchanged pointed glances. They knew what they had seen. Marcus took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in that terminal resting on him. Not in pity, not in contempt, in expectation. They wanted to see how he would respond, whether he would accept the apology and move on, or whether he would demand something more, something real. He glanced at the manager, who was still shifting uncomfortably under his gaze, at the clerks, whose earlier smirks had long since vanished, at the security guard, who now seemed incredibly interested in the scuff marks on the floor. And Marcus realized, this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been questioned, doubted, humiliated, for no other reason than the color of their skin. He had the power now, and he wasn't about to waste it. Marcus let the silence stretch a moment longer, the tension coiling tighter with each passing second. The terminal felt unnaturally still, like the world itself was holding its breath. Finally he leaned in slightly, his voice even and low. "Tell me something," he said, eyes locked onto the manager's. "If I didn't have a recognizable last name, would I still be standing here right now? Or would I be sitting in some back room being questioned like a criminal?" The manager opened his mouth, but no sound came out. There was no good answer to that. There never was. Marcus straightened, pulling the boarding pass from his jacket pocket, holding it up between two fingers with casual precision. The bold letters gleamed under the fluorescent lights. First class, Marcus Porter. Several nearby passengers leaned in to see it clearly, murmuring amongst themselves. "And you call it a misunderstanding," Marcus said, louder now, ensuring the growing crowd could hear every word. "A misunderstanding that somehow always happens to people who look like me." The manager flinched as if struck. Behind him, one of the clerks looked ready to bolt. Marcus shifted his gaze to the security guard. "You see it, right? This wasn't about a ticket. It wasn't about a security protocol. It was about what you assumed the moment you saw me." The guard said nothing. He didn't have to. Because now the entire terminal was watching. Not just Marcus, not just the manager, everyone. And they knew. They knew. Marcus dropped his boarding pass onto the counter in front of the clerk who had first doubted him. The woman hesitated, then quickly processed it without meeting his eyes. The terminal speakers crackled to life, announcing boarding for first class. Marcus gathered his things, moving with the slow, deliberate poise of someone who belonged, who had always belonged. He paused for just a moment, turning back toward the silent, embarrassed crowd of employees. "You can try to smile now," he said quietly, "but you can't erase what happened." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Truth carried its own weight. As Marcus walked toward the jetway, the passengers watched in quiet awe. Some nodded at him respectfully. A few even clapped softly. Not a celebration. No, it was something deeper. It was acknowledgement. Respect earned not through shouting or threats, but through unshakable dignity. And the ones who had mocked him. They stood frozen behind the counter, their own shame heavier than any luggage that passed through those gates. Marcus stepped into the first-class cabin, feeling the cool brush of conditioned air against his skin, the polished wood accents, the plush leather seats, a world away from the chaos at the gate, yet even here, he felt the eyes. A middle-aged man in a business suit gave a quick glance, then a second, slower one, a questioning look, thinly veiled behind a polite smile. A woman in pearls shifted her handbag a little closer to her side. A teenager peeked up from her phone, her expression flickering between curiosity and discomfort. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. He moved down the aisle, shoulders square, carrying not just his luggage, but the weight of assumptions too. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant approached, young, blonde, cheerful, but there was an edge to her professionalism. "Excuse me, sir," she said, flashing a rehearsed smile. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" For a split second, Marcus considered all the ways he could respond. Anger, sarcasm, silence. Instead, he simply smiled, genuinely calmly, and handed her his boarding pass. The flight attendant's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she read the name. A beat of awkward silence passed. "Oh," she said, a little too brightly. "My apologies, Mr. Porter. Let me get you a drink while you settle in." Marcus leaned back into his seat, his voice smooth as velvet. "Make it lemonade," he said. "And don't worry. Happens all the time." As she scurried off, the businessman across the aisle gave him a respectful nod. Maybe the first genuine one he'd seen all morning. The plane rumbled gently as it taxied toward the runway, a slow, deliberate crawl before the inevitable takeoff. Marcus stared out the window, watching the ground staff wave neon batons, the city's skyline shrinking in the distance. A soft ding signaled the cabin crew's final preparations. From the corner of his eye he caught movement. A passenger, the same businessman who had nodded earlier, leaned slightly into the aisle, peering toward Marcus's seat again, and then, not so subtly, pulled out his phone. Marcus recognized the tactic immediately. The subtle photo snap, the pretense of checking emails while actually aiming a camera. It was almost laughable. He watched as the man quickly sent the photo to someone, whispering to his companion across the row. Whispers that weren't as discreet as they thought. First class. Wonder how he afforded it. Maybe some lottery thing. Or charity, who knows. Their voices drifted across the cabin like a thin, toxic mist. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the words roll off him. Not because they didn't sting, but because they weren't new. You ever wonder how often people underestimate others just because of how they look? The engines roared to life, the plane tilted forward, building speed. And Marcus, he wasn't running from anything. He was flying toward something bigger, and they had no idea. The plane lifted off the ground, pressing everyone gently back into their seats. City lights blurred beneath the clouds, a glittering web disappearing into the night. Marcus adjusted his seatbelt, his mind already drifting toward the meeting ahead. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. He had done the work, earned the respect, built a reputation that traveled faster than gossip. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin with drink carts, the whispers from the back rows continued. Another passenger, a woman in a sharp business suit, leaned across the aisle, speaking a little too loudly to her companion. "Isn't it cute?" she said, glancing at Marcus with a thin smile, trying to play dress-up. Her voice was coated with condescension so thick it was almost tangible. Marcus didn't react. Instead, he pulled out his laptop, the screen lighting up with a project file titled Carter International Holdings, Strategic Expansion Report. A title that would mean nothing to them. At least, not yet. Minutes later, a flight attendant approached, holding a phone in her hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," she said politely. "You have an urgent message from your team. May I escort you to a private area?" The cabin quieted instantly. Heads turned. The businessman, the suited woman, everyone stared. "Mr. Carter?" Marcus rose smoothly, his tailored suit catching the light. He gave a polite nod to the stunned passengers around him. If anyone had doubts about whether he belonged here, they were about to get answers they couldn't ignore. He followed the attendant down the aisle, every step a quiet declaration. The curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane whispered shut behind him. Marcus was led to a small private seating area near the front, where an airline manager waited, flustered, sweating slightly under the stiff collar of his uniform. "Mr. Carter," the manager began, bowing his head slightly. "We're so sorry to disturb you. Your team insisted it was urgent." Marcus nodded calmly, taking the proffered phone. On the screen, a message from his executive assistant blinked. "Good luck today. Everyone's watching. The press is already buzzing about your arrival." He smiled faintly. In the background, Marcus could hear the faint murmur of the crew, not gossiping anymore, but whispering in awe. The name Carter was spreading like wildfire through the cabin. Not because of the color of his skin, not because of what he wore, but because of what he was. As Marcus handed the phone back, the manager spoke again, softer now. We didn't realize you were the Marcus Carter. Please let us know if there's anything at all, we can do to make your flight more comfortable." Marcus shook his head gently. "No need," he said. "I don't expect special treatment. Just respect." The words hung in the air, sharp and dignified. Behind the curtain, the people who had whispered and stared now sat stiffly in their seats, pretending to read, pretending not to notice the shift in atmosphere. But it was too late. The story had already rewritten itself. Marcus Carter wasn't the anomaly they thought he was. He was the new standard. And they were the ones who were out of place. The plane hummed softly as it cruised above the clouds. But inside the cabin, the air was anything but calm. It was heavy, dense with shame. With realization, Marcus sat back in his seat, his tray table down, a simple notebook open in front of him, while others scrolled frantically through their phones or shifted awkwardly in their seats. He calmly scribbled notes, as if the world around him hadn't just turned upside down. The whispers had started minutes after takeoff. At first, it was just a murmur, a casual curiosity. But then the realization spread like wildfire from seat to seat. Carter. Marcus Carter. It wasn't just a random teenager they had mocked. It wasn't just another black kid sitting somewhere they thought he didn't belong. It was him, son of Vanessa Carter, a woman who had stood before Supreme Court judges and changed laws with nothing but her voice and an iron will. Grandson of Harold Carter, a man who had built cities while others fought to tear them down. Marcus was a living symbol, a legacy written in the kind of ink that didn't wash away. And the people who had laughed, the ones who had thrown glances laced with disgust and disbelief, they now sat frozen, squirming under the weight of what they had revealed about themselves. A flight attendant, cheeks flushed with visible embarrassment, approached with a forced smile. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Marcus looked up, his eyes calm, unbothered. He saw right through her, through the rehearsed politeness, the nervous hands, the silent plea for forgiveness she didn't dare voice. "A lemonade, if you have it," he said simply, closing his notebook with a soft thud. The irony didn't escape him, nor did it escape the handful of passengers who overheard and winced at the reminder. The attendant nodded quickly, almost too quickly, and vanished down the aisle. Across the cabin, the teenagers who had laughed at him in the terminal now sat hunched low, avoiding his gaze like schoolchildren caught cheating on an exam. Their bravado was gone, replaced by the sickly realization that no amount of mockery could erase the truth. They had laughed at a king because they were too blind to see his crown. And Marcus. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter. He was patient, because time had a funny way of delivering its lessons, slowly at first, and then all at once. He leaned back against the leather seat, resting his head and letting the gentle rumble of the engines fill his ears. The sun poured in through the small oval window beside him, painting a golden halo around his silhouette. Out there, somewhere beyond the clouds, his future waited, vast, brilliant, unstoppable. And this flight, this tiny moment of petty judgment and overdue regret, it was just turbulence. The flight continued in strained silence, the hum of the engines the only sound brave enough to break it. Marcus stared out the window, watching as patches of green and brown blurred far beneath him, each mile another step away from the small-mindedness he had just witnessed, and another step closer to something much bigger than any one of them could imagine. He wasn't just flying across the country, he was flying into a future they couldn't even begin to dream about. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, the murmurs began again. But this time they carried a different weight. Not mockery, not disbelief. Shame, regret, and something even sharper, admiration. Some passengers stole glances at Marcus, hoping to catch some fragment of his calm, hoping he might not remember the things they had thought, the things they had whispered. A woman in business attire clutched her handbag a little tighter, as if shielding herself from her own guilt. A man 2 rows down shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, his hands fidgeting endlessly with the corner of his magazine. Marcus didn't spare them a second look. He had already decided. Forgiveness wasn't a performance. It wasn't something to be handed out like candy just because someone felt uncomfortable now. Forgiveness was earned. And more importantly, it was his choice, on his terms, when he was ready. Not today. Maybe not ever. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago. A new city. A new beginning. As the plane tilted slightly and the city skyline came into view, tall, proud, sprawling, Marcus smiled to himself. This city didn't know him yet, but it would. Oh, it would. Because the boy they mocked today, he wasn't just carrying a first-class ticket, he was carrying a legacy. And legacies don't ask for permission to shine. They just do. The landing gear groaned softly as the plane touched down, the weight of metal and dreams pressing against the earth. Marcus sat motionless, his hands folded in his lap, feeling the vibration under his feet, feeling the shift, not just of altitude, but of everything. Around him, passengers began to stir. Seatbelts clicked open. Whispers floated across the aisle. Some still dared to look his way, their gazes flitting like moths around a flame they were too ashamed to approach. Marcus stood up slowly, the crispness of his suit catching the morning light streaming through the cabin windows. He adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder. A simple, worn leather satchel, the same one his mother had given him when he left for college. Inside it, tucked between pages of notes and blueprints, was the dream they had laughed at. The dream they said didn't belong in first class. The dream that was about to land him a seat at tables they couldn't even imagine. The aisle felt longer than usual as he walked toward the exit, but Marcus moved with purpose, each step heavier with meaning than the last. When he reached the door, the flight attendant, the one who had hesitated to meet his eyes earlier, offered a smile. It was small, brittle around the edges, but real. "Thank you for flying with us," she said. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, then gave a polite nod, not out of obligation, out of power. Because real strength isn't about shouting back. It's about standing taller than the noise. He stepped off the plane and into the tunnel, the buzz of O'Hare International greeting him like a familiar hum. Businessmen rushed by. Mothers juggled strollers and suitcases. Teenagers laughed too loudly in groups. Life, in all its chaotic beauty, pulsed around him. He could have disappeared into the crowd, Just another traveler with somewhere to be. But not Marcus. Not today. He made his way toward the baggage claim, his phone vibrating in his pocket. A text message lit up the screen. Board meeting moved to 10 a.m. Looking forward to seeing you, Mr. Washington. Marcus smiled, not just with his mouth, but with something deeper, something no one could ever take from him again. He wasn't just someone's son anymore. He wasn't just another black kid that people sized up and looked past. He was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in America. He was a keynote speaker scheduled to address Fortune 500 executives that very afternoon. He was living proof that the seat you take doesn't define you. You define the seat. As he strode toward the car service waiting for him, his steps were lighter, but his presence was heavier with the dreams of every kid who had ever been laughed at, doubted, told to sit at the back. He was first class, in every sense of the word. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger, it's success. What about you? Do you believe that the way people treat you today defines your future? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in stories that prove anything is possible, make sure to subscribe and join us for more journeys like this. Your support helps these untold voices rise louder. Thank you for watching.